Quickly, 3 adjectives to describe John Adams.
Oh, goodness. Brilliant, pompous, warm. I think John has a way of being human that you don't always get from a Thomas Jefferson or a George Washington. And some of that's unfair because some of that is we have more of his letters to family. But I think he has a sort of an earthiness. He loves farming and will write for hours about how to mix the right manure. And he agonizes endlessly over his children and over his wife and over what he's done with his life. And I think that there's just a warm humanity to him that I find very appealing. Pompous because I think he was very a little full of himself. I mean, he could laugh at himself too, but he definitely was ambitious, but always wanted to deny that he was ambitious. He was a little bit on the vain side. He tended to want to be thought of, and it was very important for people to think of him as the great statesman, and it killed him that other people got more credit than he did. That very much frustrated him when he first went to France. And actually even beyond this, people would think he was Sam Adams, not John Adams, and this made him a little bit crazy because he wanted to be known for himself and for all the things he had done. And then just an incredibly brilliant man who had a vision of what the United States could be. He is the one who really crafted the Constitution on which the U.S. Constitution is drafted. He came up with the original ideas for the treaties that would end up being our original diplomatic agreements with France and England and the Netherlands and other European powers. He had a kind of foresight and a sense of history and a sense of America's place in history that was really quite extraordinary.
And for Abigail?
For Abigail, strong-minded, they're all going to be variations on the theme of determined in some way or another. Also extraordinarily bright, a really smart woman, especially for someone who did not have the advantage of a kind of a formal education of any kind. And what would be my third adjective for Abigail? Compassionate. I think that's not something that comes across as clearly. But I think she spent a tremendous amount of time caring for other people. She was a very charitable woman, but also she really thought deeply and put a lot of her energy toward what is right for people and how can people be treated properly. And you see that a little bit with the Remember the Ladies letter, where she's talking about the need for women to have protection and to be given the rights that men have. Not necessarily to be equal to men in the modern 21st century sense of it, but that they deserve those protections. You see that when she talks about slavery and about her just general distaste with the idea of one person owning another, even though she grew up in a household that had 2 slaves in it. So I think that she's not kind of classically compassionate in that way, but I think she really turned a tremendous amount of her energy toward a really practical enactment of how can you make people's lives better. And then, as I say, she was absolutely a brilliant woman. She was never formally educated, though she did have access to some of the best libraries in eastern Massachusetts growing up, and she made ample use of them and was very, very widely read. Interestingly, she was always embarrassed that she wasn't formally educated, and so she was very embarrassed by her handwriting and by her spelling and the fact that she sprinkles periods and commas throughout her writing as if they are, birdseed and no rhyme or reason whatsoever. So she was always a little ashamed of that aspect of things.
Yes, it's interesting to see the spelling actually in both of their letters and how unique it is, but how much it improves when she's actually quoting another
Yes.
source, and then it's pristine.
And then it's very pristine. But when she is just left on her own, and some of that is also regional accent, and you'll see that sometimes that she spells Franklin, as in Benjamin Franklin, with an ing at the end, or Canada as with a y at the end. And I think that's a little bit about how she heard the word and is spelling them a little bit phonetically. But and that's common for the 18th century. You don't really have standardized spelling yet. You're just starting to get formal dictionaries, and it's not really till the 19th century that people have access to those dictionaries, and there's a movement afoot to kind of get everyone to start spelling words the same way. But they are definitely very flexible in their spelling.
So as a women's history specialist, you must have been very excited to learn about Abigail.
Absolutely. And she's fascinating because she's so often seen as kind of the first, I think, vocal advocate for some aspect of women's rights in the 18th century in America. She's not. There are others before her, and I think that Abigail has always benefited from the fact that so many of her papers have survived. We have a sort of saying that there's no documents, no history. And so you can be the most brilliant, determined woman in the world, but if we don't have any record of what you had to say, it doesn't matter that much, and you don't have that kind of influence. Whereas her letters survived, and thus we've been able to know what she was thinking. And I think that's affected how she's seen. But certainly she was ahead of her time in just being able to articulate an idea. She even sort of speculated on the notion of women's rights to vote, though she was never really she wasn't advocating that exactly, but she sort of mused on how the world would be different if women could vote. And she thought, she more than once commented on the fact that all great male leaders had a woman behind them to make it work and make things happen. And I think that she really did see in a fairly far-sighted way the potentials of women's roles. So it's been great fun to look at those letters more closely and pick out the pieces. Certainly her letter asking John to remember the ladies is the most famous example, but there are many others where in a passing remark or in a longer comment she has a lot to say about women. The letter I mentioned earlier in response to the French ladies was all about women's education, and she was a huge proponent of that. So there are a lot of different dimensions in which Abigail was thinking about, writing about, trying to promote women and women's abilities.
She also seemed to be extraordinarily resourceful in that she was constantly asking John to send her various items that she could then market and resell.
Yes.
In order to survive, since the farm probably wasn't doing all that well.
She was the real financial entrepreneur of the family, and not just the reselling of goods, but which she did and was quite profitable. She made quite a lot of money. She then would turn around and invest that money, and she was very much the one who determined the investments. And she was really an early junk bond trader, which perhaps we don't want to admit to, but it's true. She was buying up speculative bonds and eventually holding them, collecting interest on them, eventually reselling them. And really a lot of, the Adamses were never a wealthy family, but what resources they had was very much due to Abigail's ingenuity and her financial acumen. John's attitude was always just buy land, keep buying land, buy more land. And quite honestly, they ended up with a lot of land that was largely valueless, and you couldn't farm it and you couldn't do much with it. And Abigail's, oh, no, we should put our money here. And she was right, and she did very well. So yes, she was a very savvy investor.